from Hollywood, it's time now for Edmund O'Brien as...
Johnny Dollar.
Oh, yes. This is Inspector Sailor, Scotland Yard.
Oh, yes, Inspector. Thanks for calling back. I understand you've been assigned the Scott jewel theft investigation?
Yes. Inspector Finley's been taken ill. I was given the case this morning. As a matter of fact, I just received the file with your request to telephone.
Well, that puts us about abreast then, Inspector. I got in from the States last night. I'd like to get together with you so we could compare notes.
Yes, splendid. Could you come to my office?
At your convenience.
Well, then, why don't you come right over? But first, Mr. Dollar, tell me, did the insurance company send you to London in the belief that the yard is no longer competent?
What?
Inspector Finch?
Oh, yes. Yes, I worked on a case with him over here last year. How is he?
Oh, quite well, thank you. He complimented you quite highly, sir.
Well, that's very nice of him. But as I remember it, I think I was more of a burden than a help to him.
Well, I doubt that. Well, I suppose we should face the situation at hand.
Yeah. I brought an accurate description of all the jewelry insured by Mrs. Scott.
Ah, splendid.
But the cable that reported the theft wasn't quite clear as to which pieces were missing.
Well, Inspector Finley's information on that score is quite accurate, I think. Here we are.
Oh, thank you.
And he's covered the methods used in the commission of the crime quite thoroughly, I think. I'm going to spend the afternoon crime index. I should probably be able to link the method with a few of our known criminals.
Gentleman's investigation, huh?
I suppose so. Rather tedious, but quite often successful.
I'd like to see Mrs. Scott myself, if it's all right with you.
Of course. I shall arrange a car and a driver for you. Will early afternoon be suitable?
Well, thanks, but there's no reason to go to that bother, is there? Isn't she staying here in London?
No, she let a place near Seven Oaks in Surrey, about 20 miles south of here. Quite an historic establishment, I'm told. It's called Hatchet House.
Before I left London that afternoon, Inspector Sailors and I pulled the few facts we had. I was able to tell him that Mrs. Marcella Scott, reputedly a wealthy Texas widow, was actually slightly on her uppers as far as ready cash went. She had sold some jewelry the previous year for considerably less than its insured value. He gave me the news that Miss Scott frequently had been seen in the company of another American tourist named Norman King. And together, we figured the loss at slightly over $100,000.